for Vivien. Petrova, a third-grade teacher at a struggling public school life, was a series of small, predictable moments painted in shades of chalk dust and budget cuts. Her world was measured in lesson plans and the mounting medical bills for her younger sister. Until one quiet Tuesday afternoon, that predictable world collided with the screech of tires and the cold glint of steel in a sunlit park. In a heartbeat, she found herself shielding a gentle-faced old woman from men who had death in their eyes. She didn't know the woman's name was Isabella Costello, the revered matriarch of the city's most feared crime family. She didn't know the woman's son Dante commanded the city's shadows with an iron will. She only knew she had to act. And that single selfless choice would shatter her simple world forever, plunging her into a life of dangerous luxury, impossible choices, and a love forged in fire and fear. The scent of blooming magnolia hung heavy in the warm air of Bellevue Park. It was Vivien Petrova's sanctuary, a small slice of peace wedged between the concrete towers of the city. With a stack of student essays in her tote bag and a lukewarm tea in her hand, she sought out her favorite bench, the one tucked away behind a thicket of rose bushes. Her life was a carefully balanced equation of sacrifice and necessity. Every dollar she saved on lunch was a dollar toward her sister Sophia's next round of experimental treatment. At 26, Vivien felt the weight of a life far older than her years. She was just uncapping her red pen when the first sound of trouble reached her. Not a gunshot, but something more mundane and therefore more jarring. The panicked squawk of pigeons taking flight all at once. Her head snapped up. An elegant, silver-haired woman who had been feeding them moments before was now being flanked by two large men in dark tracksuits. The woman's own companion, a younger woman who looked more like a personal assistant than a bodyguard, was already on the ground, groaning. The silver-haired woman, however, was not screaming. She held her chin high, her voice low, but laced with a surprising venom. "Get your filthy hands off me. Do you have any idea who I am?" One of the men laughed, a coarse, ugly sound. "Yeah, we know exactly who you are, Isabella. That's the whole point." He grabbed her arm. Something inside Vivien, a primal instinct she didn't know she possessed, took over. She wasn't a fighter. She was a teacher who broke up arguments over crayons. But the sight of this proud, defenseless woman being manhandled by thugs ignited a fire in her belly. Before she could think, she was on her feet. "Hey!" she yelled, her voice trembling but loud. "Leave her alone!" The two men turned their faces a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Mind your own business, little bird," the second man snarled, revealing a gold tooth. Vivien's mind raced. Fight them. Impossible. Scream, maybe. But her eyes darted around the secluded alcove. They had chosen this spot for its privacy. She saw the heavy stainless steel thermos of tea in her hand. Without a second thought, she hurled it with all her might. It wasn't a graceful throw, but it was effective. The thermos struck the gold-toothed man squarely in the temple with a dull thud. He staggered back, cursing a hand flying to his head. That was the only opening she needed. Vivien lunged forward, not toward the men, but towards the woman. This way now, she hissed, grabbing Isabella's surprisingly frail hand. The old woman didn't hesitate. Together they scrambled through the rose bushes, thorns snagging at their clothes. Vivien knew the park like the back of her hand. She didn't run for the main exit, but for the public botanical garden that bordered the park's east side, a place typically filled with tourists and staff. "Security!" Vivien screamed as they burst through the archway into the manicured gardens. "Help, call the police!" Her shouts combined with the sight of two women in disarray, one with a torn sleeve and the other with a wild look in her eyes, was enough. A uniformed guard spoke into his radio, and people began to stare. The two thugs, realizing they had lost their chance, melted back into the shadows of the park. Panting, Vivien leaned against a fountain, her heart hammering against her ribs. The old woman Isabella straightened her cashmere cardigan and smoothed her hair. She looked at Vivien, her dark, intelligent eyes, filled not with fear, but with a profound, assessing gratitude. "You are very brave," she said, her voice steady. "My name is Isabella Costello." Vivien could only nod, still catching her breath. "Vivien Petrova." Before another word could be exchanged, the tranquil atmosphere was shattered again, this time by the arrival of 3 black sedans that screeched to a halt on the service road nearby. They weren't police cars. Men in impeccably tailored black suits emerged, moving with a predatory silence that was far more terrifying than the loud bluster of the two thugs. They formed a perimeter, their eyes scanning every direction, hands tucked inside their jackets. The park security guard who had been approaching them froze, his face paling. A man stepped out of the lead car. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Vivien's car, and moved with the lethal grace of a panther. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, with eyes so dark and intense they seemed to absorb the light around them. He strode directly to Isabella, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for any harm. "Mother," he said, his voice a low, controlled rumble that sent a shiver down Vivien's spine. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Dante," Isabella said, patting his arm. Thanks to this young woman, Dante's eyes finally landed on Vivien. They were cold, devoid of any gratitude or relief. It was like being examined by a coroner. He looked at her rumpled clothes, her flushed face, and the adrenaline still shaking her hands, and his expression hardened with suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded, the words clipped and sharp. He wasn't asking for an introduction. He was demanding an explanation for her very existence at this scene. "This is Vivien Petrova." His mother interjected firmly. "She saved my life." Dante ignored the explanation. He took a step closer to Vivien, his presence overwhelming. "What were you doing here? Why did you get involved?" Vivien bristled, her fear momentarily replaced by indignation. "I was sitting on a bench. I saw 2 men attacking your mother. What was I supposed to do? Just watch?" His eyes narrowed, searching her face for any hint of deception. To him, an act of selfless courage was a variable that didn't compute. In his world, no one did anything for free. Everyone had an angle. "Jason," Dante said, without looking away from Vivien. A man with a scar above his eyebrow stepped forward. "Take Miss Petrova's statement and her details. We'll be in touch." The words "in touch" sounded less like a promise and more like a threat. He then turned his back on her, his full attention on his mother, speaking to her in rapid, low Italian. Vivien felt a profound sense of dismissal, as if she were a piece of furniture that had served its purpose. 2 of Dante's men escorted her to a bench. Jason, the scarred man, approached with a small notebook. His questions were polite, but probing, circling around her motives, her background, her reason for being in that exact spot at that exact time. Vivien, still shaken, answered truthfully. She felt less like a good Samaritan and more like a suspect. As she watched the men carefully guide Isabella Costello into the armored sedan, she saw Dante pause and look back at her one last time. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold control. Vivien Petrova had no idea that her simple act of courage had just thrown a stone into a very deep, very dark lake, and the ripples were about to come rushing back to drown her. The next 24 hours were a blur of nervous energy. Vivien tried to lose herself in the familiar routine of her life, grading papers, preparing a lesson on photosynthesis, making soup for Sophia. But a knot of anxiety was cinched tight in her stomach. Every time a dark car drove down her street, her heart leapt into her throat. The name Costello echoed in her mind. A quick, paranoid search online had confirmed her fears. The Costello weren't just wealthy, they were infamous. Dante Costello was the head of the city's largest and most powerful criminal syndicate, a man who operated in the shadows. His name whispered in connection with everything from union control to illegal casinos. He was a ghost in a bespoke suit, and she had thrown her thermos at a man trying to kidnap his mother. The call came the next afternoon, just as she was cleaning her classroom. The number was blocked. Ms. Petrova. A smooth baritone voice said it was Jason. Mr. Costello requests your presence. A car will be at your apartment in 1 hour. It wasn't a request. Vivien's hand tightened on the phone. I don't understand. I gave you my statement. Mr. Costello wishes to thank you personally, Jason said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Please be ready. The line went dead. Panic seized her. This was how it happened in movies, didn't it? The witness who knew too much was invited for a chat and was never seen again. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That a man wanted to thank her. She thought about running. But where would she go with a sick sister, tethered to the city's best hospital? Exactly 1 hour. Later, a black Mercedes, the kind with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian, pulled up to her modest apartment building. The driver, a mountain of a man in a black suit, got out and simply stood by the rear door, waiting. Her neighbors peeked through their curtains, their eyes wide. Swallowing her fear, Vivien locked her door and walked to the car, feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. The ride was silent and unnervingly smooth. They didn't drive toward the city's downtown towers, but headed for the opulent old money hills overlooking the bay. The car passed through a set of immense wrought iron gates, bearing a subtle sea emblem, and proceeded up a long, winding driveway, flanked by cypress trees. The house, no. The estate was a breathtaking monstrosity of pale stone and dark wood, a modern fortress with the soul of a Renaissance villa. Vivien was led through a grand foyer, where the sound of her sensible shoes echoed on the marble floor. A stern-faced housekeeper took her coat, and Jason appeared from a side hallway. "This way," he said, guiding her toward a pair of large oak doors. He opened them to reveal a study that looked like it had been pulled from a history museum. The walls were lined with leather-bound books. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, and the air smelled of old wood and whiskey. And there, standing by the window, was Dante Costello. He turned, and once again his presence filled the room, silencing the air. He was out of his suit jacket now, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing powerful toned muscles and a sliver of an intricate tattoo near his wrist. "Ms. Petrova, thank you for coming," he said, his voice as cold and smooth as the marble in the hall. He gestured to a plush leather armchair in front of his desk. "Please." Vivien sat perching on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He remained standing, a deliberate power move that put her at an immediate disadvantage. "My mother is very grateful to you." He began, his eyes never leaving her face. She is a spirited woman. Her security detail has been reprimanded for allowing her to slip away from them. But the fault is mine. I have grown complacent. He walked over to his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. The men who attacked her were from a rival organization, the Falcone family. They are new, arrogant, and stupid. They thought taking my mother would give them leverage. Vivien swallowed hard. I'm glad she's okay. She is, Dante said, his voice dropping. But now we have a problem. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Me, Vivien whispered. You are a witness, he stated flatly. You saw their faces. You interfered. To them, you are not a random school teacher. You are an associate of the Costello family, a loose end. They will not simply forget about you. A cold dread washed over Vivien. He wasn't threatening her. He was explaining her new, terrifying reality. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dante pushed off the desk and walked to a small bar in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He placed one on the small table next to her. She stared at it, unmoving. I see 2 paths, he said, taking a sip from his own glass. Path 1. I give you a substantial amount of money. Enough to disappear. Change your name. Move to a new city, a new country perhaps. You would have to leave everything behind, your job, your friends. He paused, his gaze intensifying. Your sister. Vivien's heart stopped. Leave Sophia. Impossible. It was a non-choice, and he knew it. And path 2, she asked, her throat tight. He set his glass down and walked back to stand directly in front of her, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. His proximity was dizzying, a mixture of intimidation and a strange, masculine scent of expensive cologne and power. Path 2, he said softly, the quiet tone more menacing than any shout. You come under my protection. You will live here on this estate. You will be watched over by my men. Your every need will be provided for. The Falcones or anyone else will not be able to touch you. You will be safe. Vivien stared at him, bewildered. Live here I can't. I have a job. I have a life. I have to take care of my sister. Your job is no longer safe for you, he countered smoothly. And as for your sister, he walked back to his desk and picked up a manila folder. He opened it and slid it across the polished wood toward her. Vivien Petrova, age 19, stage 3, nephrotic syndrome, in need of a kidney transplant, but her rare blood type makes finding a donor difficult. Currently undergoing dialysis and a series of experimental treatments at St. Jude's Hospital. Treatments that your insurance barely covers, and which you pay for out of pocket, draining your meager salary. Vivien felt the blood drain from her face. He knew everything. The details of her sister's illness, her financial desperation. This wasn't just a background check. It was a violation. How information is the currency of my world. Miss Petrova, he said, his voice softening for the first time. Not with kindness, but with the cold certainty of a predator closing a trap. I am offering you a solution. Under my protection, your sister's medical care will be my responsibility. All of it. The best doctors in the world. I will find her a donor. I will fund the research myself if I have to. She will have the best chance at a full life. All you have to do is accept my protection. Vivien stared at him, her mind reeling. He was offering her the one thing she wanted more than anything in the world. Sophia's health. But the price was her freedom. She would be a bird in a gilded cage, a prisoner of the very man whose world had just endangered her. It was a devil's bargain, presented as a gift. She looked at the folder with Sophia's name on it, then back up into Dante Costello's dark, unyielding eyes. He was not a savior. He was a king in a dark kingdom. And he was offering to solve her biggest problem, not out of gratitude, but to clean up a mess, to control a variable, to own her. And in that moment, with the weight of her sister's life pressing down on her, Vivien knew she had no choice at all. The transition was swift and absolute. Vivien's old life was packed up and erased by silent, efficient men in the space of a single afternoon. Her landlord was paid off. Her resignation was tendered at school with a generous severance package that stunned the principal, and her few sentimental belongings were transported to the Costello estate. When she tried to argue to say she could pack her own things, Jason simply gave her a patient look and said, "Mr. Costello insists on making this as seamless as possible for you." Seamless felt like being methodically dismembered from her own reality. Her new home was a suite of rooms in a quiet wing of the mansion. It was larger than her entire apartment, with a four-poster bed, a marble bathroom, and a balcony overlooking a sprawling, manicured garden. The closet was already filled with new clothes in her size, from simple sweaters to elegant dresses she would never have occasion to wear. It was beautiful, luxurious, and utterly suffocating. The rules were unspoken, but clear. She could not leave the estate without Dante's permission, and an escort of at least 2 guards. Her phone was replaced with a new one, pre-programmed with only a few numbers. Dante Jason, the head of the house staff, and a direct line to Sophia's new private room at the hospital. She was a guest with the freedom of a prisoner. The first week was a study in loneliness. Vivien wandered the vast, silent halls of the mansion, feeling like a ghost. The staff were polite, but distant, trained to be invisible. She saw Dante only in passing a glimpse of him crossing the foyer, the sound of his car departing in the early morning. He was a phantom in his own home, and she was an object he had acquired and stored away. Her only solace was Isabella. On the 3rd day, the elegant matriarch sought her out, finding Vivien in the enormous library, staring blankly at a wall of books. A house is not a home until it is filled with warmth, Isabella said, her voice gentle. She carried a tray with 2 cups of tea and a plate of biscotti. "My son Dante is a man of logic, not comfort. He sees a problem, your safety, and he builds a fortress to solve it. He does not think about the person living inside the walls." Vivien gave her a weak smile. "It's very safe." Isabella sat opposite her, her eyes kind. "It is a cage, my dear. A beautiful, comfortable cage. I know. I have lived in one my entire life. But you can find freedom within the walls if you look for it." From that day on, Isabella became Vivien's companion. They would walk in the gardens, Isabella pointing out her favorite roses. They would cook together in the mansion's cavernous kitchen, filling the air with the scent of garlic and basil, much to the consternation of the professional chef. Isabella spoke of her late husband, Antonio, the man who built the Costello empire, and of the challenges of raising a son like Dante in a world of violence and betrayal. He was not always so cold, Isabella confided one afternoon, as they needed past. When he was a boy, he had a laugh that could fill this entire house. But this life, it carves away the soft parts of a man, leaving only steel. Through his mother, Vivien began to see glimpses of the man behind the mask. She learned that the intricate tattoo on his arm was a tribute to his father. She learned that he played the cello, though no one had heard him play in years. Dante, for his part, began to observe her. He would return late at night and find the library light on, catching a glimpse of her curled in a chair, lost in a book. He saw her speaking with his mother, a genuine smile on her face, and noted the warmth it brought back to Isabella's eyes, a warmth that had been missing since his father's death. He had her brought to the estate for purely logical reasons, to protect a civilian asset and neutralize a threat. But Vivien Petrova was not a neat and tidy variable. She was quiet, but not meek. She was polite, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. He found both irritating and intriguing. Their first real conversation since her arrival happened a week later. He found her on her balcony, staring up at the night sky. "The city lights are too bright here," she said without turning around. "You can't see the stars properly." He came to stand beside her, the space between them charged with an unspoken tension. "We have a property upstate. There are no city lights there, just trees and darkness." "A place to get away?" she asked. "A place to be safe," he corrected, his voice low. "There's a difference." He paused. "I received a report from the hospital. Sophia's new treatment protocol is showing positive results. Her doctors are optimistic." Vivien's heart leapt. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the soft light from her room. "Really? That's thank you. I don't know what to say." For the first time, he saw something other than fear or resentment in her eyes. It was pure, unadulterated gratitude, and it hit him with an unexpected force. "You have nothing to thank me for," he said, his tone gruffer than he intended. "I am merely fulfilling my end of our arrangement." "It doesn't feel like an arrangement when it's my sister's life," she replied softly. "To you it might be a transaction, Mr. Costello. To me it's everything." She called him Mr. Costello. He was the head of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, legal and otherwise. Everyone called him that, but from her it sounded formal, distant a barrier. "My name is Dante," he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "Vivien," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. It was a small moment, a tiny crack in the fortress he had built around himself. He found himself wanting to know what she was reading, what she thought of the paintings in the West Hall. What made her laugh? These were dangerous, useless thoughts, and he immediately suppressed them. She was a responsibility, not a confidant, a problem to be managed. But as he walked away, the image of her face softened by the moonlight, and genuine gratitude lingered in his mind. He had brought her into his world to control her. He was beginning to fear he was the one losing control. Dante Costello was a man who thrived on control. He controlled his empire, his emotions, and every person within his orbit. Vivien, however, was a persistent disruption to his carefully ordered world. He'd given her a cage, but she was quietly turning it into a home, her gentle presence seeping into the cracks of the cold, sterile mansion. He would find vases of flowers from the garden in the hallways, hear the distant sound of her soft laughter with his mother, and notice the staff's demeanor softening around her. He began to orchestrate small kindnesses, though he would never call them that. They were strategic moves designed to keep her compliant and comfortable. He arranged for a private tutor to visit the estate so Sophia wouldn't fall behind in her college coursework. He had a small art studio set up for Vivien. When Isabella mentioned she liked to paint, he would leave specific books on the library table, first editions of classics she had mentioned enjoying, never acknowledging the gesture. Vivien was not naive. She knew these weren't gifts born of affection. They were investments. They were the velvet lining of her cage, designed to make her forget the bars. Still, the impact was undeniable. Sophia was thriving under the care of the world's best specialists. A potential kidney donor, a match found through Dante's vast network, was being evaluated. The weight that had crushed Vivien for years was lifting, replaced by a bewildering, complicated gratitude. Her daily visits to the hospital were the centerpiece of her existence. She was always driven by two stone-faced guards who would wait outside Sophia's room, a constant reminder of her situation. It was during one of these visits that the precarious peace was shattered. Vivien was reading to Sophia when a new male nurse entered the room. He was tall and lean with a friendly, almost boyish face. "Just here to check her vitals and switch out the IV bag," he said with a practiced, reassuring smile. Vivien smiled back, but a tiny, prickling sense of unease settled over her. The nurses on this floor were all familiar to her. She'd never seen him before. As he approached Sophia's bed, his back to Vivien, she noticed something odd. A faint serpent-like tattoo was visible on the side of his neck, just above his collar. It was the same design she had seen on a file on Dante's desk one evening when she'd brought him a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for. The file labeled felony. Ice flooded her veins. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp. The nurse froze his hand, holding a new IV bag. He turned his head slowly, and the friendly mask was gone. His eyes were cool and hard. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice losing its gentle cadence. Vivien's mind screamed. The guards were outside too far. Sophia was weak, vulnerable. Vivien stood up slowly, placing herself between the man and her sister. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was surprisingly steady. "Who are you? I haven't seen you on this floor before." The man's lips curled into a sneer. "Management's trying out some new staff." He took a step forward. "Now if you'll just move aside." "No," Vivien said. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon. "Anything." She spotted the heavy glass water pitcher on the bedside table. The man's patience snapped. He lunged, not for Sophia, but for Vivien, intending to shove her out of the way, but the adrenaline that had saved Isabella Costello surged through her again. Vivien sidestepped and grabbed the pitcher, swinging it with all her strength into the side of his head. It shattered on impact, and the man crumpled to the floor, stunned and bleeding. At that moment, drawn by the sound of the crash, the two guards burst into the room. Guns drawn, they took in the scene. Vivien standing, breathing heavily, with the neck of a broken pitcher in her hand, the unconscious man on the floor, and a terrified Sophia in the bed, and immediately understood. One guard secured the man, while the other spoke urgently into his wrist. Code red. The asset's sister was targeted. Hostile, neutralized. Within 10 minutes, Dante arrived. He didn't stride in. He swept into the hospital room like a storm front, his face a thunderous mask of cold fury. His eyes went first to Vivien, checking her for harm, then to a pale but safe Sophia, and finally to the groaning imposter being hauled to his feet by his men. He walked over to the Falcone thug and looked down at him with utter contempt. "Who sent you?" Dante's voice was dangerously quiet. The man just spat on the floor. Dante didn't flinch. He simply nodded to Jason. "Take him to the warehouse, find out what he knows, then erase him." The words were delivered with such chilling finality that Vivien felt a tremor of fear. This was the man behind the cello and the first edition books. A killer. He turned back to her. The fury in his eyes was still there, but it was now banked, overshadowed by something else. Something she couldn't name. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw. Vivien shook her head, unable to speak. She was trembling, the adrenaline finally giving way to shock. Dante stepped closer, and to her utter astonishment reached out and gently took the broken pitcher from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was like an electric shock, a brief, searing connection that left her breathless. He looked at the small cut on her hand from a shard of glass. Without a word, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and carefully wrapped it around her palm. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his focus entirely on the minor wound, as if it were the most important thing in the world. "You saved her," he said, his dark eyes finally meeting hers. "Twi now, you have done what my trained men could not. You protected my family, and yours." He was looking at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with transactions or arrangements. It was raw, unguarded. In that moment, he wasn't the feared dawn of the Costello family. He was just a man, shaken by the near loss of something he held precious and humbled by the courage of the woman standing before him. The line between protector and protected captor and captive blurred into something new, something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The attack on Sofia was a declaration of war. For Rico Falcone to target a sick girl in a hospital bed was not just a strategic move. It was a violation of a code that even men like Dante Costello held sacred. It was an unforgivable insult, and it demanded a response not of strategy, but of annihilation. The atmosphere at the estate transformed overnight. The quiet, watchful tension was replaced by a palpable sense of menace. More guards patrolled the grounds, their faces grim. Dante became a ghost, a whirlwind of furious energy operating out of his study at all hours. Vivien would hear the low murmur of voices from behind the closed doors, the sharp, clipped tones of men planning destruction. She was moved to a safer suite of rooms in the mansion's core, and Sofia was relocated to a private, secure medical wing that Dante had built years ago, within the estate itself, staffed by a full-time medical team. For the first time, Vivien was truly, undeniably a prisoner. Her world shrunk to the confines of the Costello property. Yet paradoxically, she had never felt safer. Dante's retribution was swift and biblical. It wasn't a series of attacks. It was a systematic dismantling. One by one, the Falcone family's assets began to crumble. A shipment of illegal arms vanished from a locked warehouse. A high-stakes casino, their biggest earner, was raided by the police, acting on an anonymous tip so detailed it included the code to the hidden safe. Keelcone left tenants were arrested on old warrants that had been conveniently resurrected. The city held its breath. The underworld buzzed with whispers of the Costello ghost, who seemed to be everywhere at once, striking with surgical precision and terrifying force. Rico Falcone, who had fancied himself the new king, found his gnawant empire turning to dust around him. Vivien saw the toll it was taking on Dante. He grew leaner, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and a cold, burning rage. He barely slept. She would find him in his study at 3:00 a.m., staring at a map of the city, dotted with pins, a glass of untouched whiskey by his side. One night, unable to sleep, she went to the kitchen to make some tea. She found him there, staring out of the large window, into the darkness, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. She said nothing, simply prepared a cup of chamomile tea and placed it on the counter beside him. He looked at the cup, then at her. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice rough. "So should you," she replied softly. "This is because of me. If I hadn't been there in the park." "No." He cut her off, turning to face her fully. His intensity was startling in the quiet kitchen. "This is not because of you. This is because of them. Because of men who have no honor. They broke the rules. They targeted an innocent. They targeted your sister. They would have done it eventually to get to me in some other way. You just happened to be the one who showed them what courage looks like." He picked up the tea, his long fingers wrapping around the warm mug. "My father was killed in a car bomb. I was 16. He was coming home from a meeting. I was supposed to be with him, but I'd stayed behind to finish some homework." He stared into the cup, his gaze distant. "My mother found me before I saw the wreckage. She held me and said, 'Now you are the man of the family. You must be strong enough for two.'" He took a slow sip of tea. "I have spent my entire life building walls, making myself into steel, so no one could ever touch my family again, when I saw that animal standing over your sister's bed. I felt the same helplessness I felt that day. And I will burn this city to the ground before I ever feel that way again." Vivien stood frozen, listening to the confession he probably hadn't shared with anyone but his own soul. She saw past the dawn, past the killer, and saw the 16-year-old boy who had lost his father and been handed a bloody crown. She saw the immense, crushing weight he carried every single day. Impulsively, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. His muscles tensed under her touch, but he didn't pull away. "You are not helpless, Dante," she whispered. "You are the strongest person I have ever met." He looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. The space between them crackled. The war for the city raged outside the mansion walls, a storm of violence and fear. But inside the quiet kitchen, a different, more profound battle was being waged. A struggle between the cold, logical man he had forced himself to be, and the flicker of warmth and vulnerability she ignited in him. He lifted his free hand, his calloused fingers, hesitating for a moment before gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, a stark contrast to the violence he commanded. "Stay with me," he murmured. The words both a plea and a command, just for a little while. She didn't answer with words. She simply nodded her hand, remaining on his arm, a silent promise to be an anchor in his storm. The war ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, final click. A week after his confession in the kitchen, Dante found Vivien in the art studio he had made for her. She was sketching the view from the window, her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched her for a long moment. This woman who had walked into his life and rearranged its very foundations. "It's over," he said simply. She turned her charcoal-smudged fingers, stilling on the page. "What is the Falcone Rico?" Falcone was arrested this morning. The FBI picked him up on racketeering and conspiracy charges. An old associate of his decided to testify in exchange for immunity. He gave a wry, humorless smile. People become very cooperative when their life expectancy shortens. Vivien let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So it's safe now for you?" "Yes," Dante said. "The threat is gone. You're free to go." The words she had longed to hear for weeks landed with the thud of a closing door. Free to go. She could walk out of the gates, return to some semblance of her old life. She could get a new apartment, find a new teaching job. Sophia was on the transplant list, her care secured. Dante had fulfilled his promise. She was free. So why did the thought of leaving feel like stepping off a cliff? She looked around the studio at the life he had given her. She thought of Isabella's warmth, of Sophia's safe and peaceful recovery, down the hall of Dante's tortured confession in the dead of night. This cage had become a sanctuary, this captor a protector. And Sophia? She asked, her voice quiet. My promise stands, he said, his expression unreadable. Her care will be funded for life. A trust has been established. You will want for nothing. I will have Jason arrange for your relocation anywhere you want to go. A new life. As we discussed, he was giving her an out. He was pushing her away, back to the world where she belonged. A world that wasn't filled with shadows and bloodshed. It was the most honorable thing he could do. And it felt like a betrayal. Vivien stood up and walked toward him, her heart pounding. You talk about it like it's a business deal. The threat is gone. My promise stands. Is that all this was to you? Fulfilling an obligation. A flicker of something. Pain confusion crossed his face before the mask of indifference snapped back into place. It is what's best. You don't belong in this world, Vivien. It will poison you. It will destroy the very things in you that I... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The things in me that... What she pushed her voice, gaining strength that you admire. The parts of me that aren't made of steel. Maybe you need that. Maybe you need someone to remind you that not everything has to be a transaction or a war. She was standing directly in front of him now, close enough to see the conflict raging in his dark eyes. I don't want a new life, Dante, she said, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. I don't want to be relocated. You brought me into this world. You showed me its darkness, but you also showed me your mother's love, your loyalty, your pain. You can't just send me away now that the danger is past. He remained silent, his jaw tight, his entire body rigid with control. What are you so afraid of? She asked, softly, reaching up to touch his face. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Her fingers traced the hard line of his jaw. Did I see you? Not the dawn, not the ghost, but the man who drinks chamomile tea in the middle of the night and worries about his mother. The man who was gentle with my sister and wrapped my hand when I cut it. His control finally broke. With a low groan, he tangled his hand in her hair, pulling her to him, his other arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her against him as his mouth came down on hers. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a deluge, a release of all the tension, the fear, the longing he had kept locked away. It was desperate and hungry, a confirmation of everything that had been unspoken between them. It was the surrender of a man who had never surrendered to anyone in his life. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. Vivien. He rasped her name, a prayer on his lips. If you stay, there is no going back. You would be choosing this life, choosing me. What if I'm not choosing the life? She whispered, her hands moving up to cup his face. What if I'm just choosing you? A slow smile, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him, spread across his face, transforming his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated shock and relief. The checkmate in his war against the Falconese had been a matter of power and strategy. But this, the surrender of his own heart, was the only victory that truly mattered. Vivien didn't leave. The gates of the Costello estate, which had once seemed like the bars of a prison, now felt like the arms of a protective embrace. Her decision rippled through the household, changing the very air within it. The staff who had treated her with respectful distance now addressed her with a new deference, a warmth that acknowledged her as the unspoken lady of the house. Isabella was overjoyed, openly calling Vivien the daughter she'd always wanted. Life settled into a new, extraordinary rhythm. Vivien's days were no longer filled with the fear of the outside world, but with purpose within her new one. She became the heart of the cold stone mansion. She worked with Sophia's tutors, oversaw the gardens with Isabella, and turned the vast, intimidating library into a comfortable haven where she would read late into the night. Her relationship with Dante was a quiet revelation. The walls he had so carefully constructed around himself did not crumble overnight, but she had found the door. He began to come home earlier, seeking her out, not in his study, but in the library or the garden. They would talk for hours, her gentle questions slowly drawing out the stories of his past, his fears for the future, his dreams for an empire that could one day be more legitimate. He started playing the cello again, the deep, melancholic notes filling the halls in the evenings, a sound meant only for her. She was his anchor, his conscience, his peace. She never asked him to change who he was. She understood that the steel in him was what kept them all safe, but she softened his edges, reminded him of the man he was, before the world had demanded he become a king. About 6 months after the war with the Falconese ended, Sophia received her new kidney. The transplant was a resounding success. On the day Sophia took her first steps in the estate's medical wing, her face glowing with a healthy vitality Vivien hadn't seen in years, Dante was there. He stood back, watching the two sisters embrace a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. Later that evening, he found Vivien on the balcony of their suite, looking out at the city lights. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "She looks well," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Thanks to you," Vivien said, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "You gave me back my sister Dante." "No," he corrected her gently. "You saved my mother. You stood against men who would have killed you without a second thought. Twice you fought for your family. All I did was clear the board for you." He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "You are stronger than any man in my employee. Vivien Petrova." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I'm not the same person who was sitting on that park bench." "No," he agreed, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "You are not. You are the queen of this castle. My queen." She was no longer the poor teacher, a victim of circumstance, pulled into a dangerous world. She was a woman who had faced down that danger and had chosen her own path. She had walked into a gilded cage and through her courage, compassion, and unwavering love had transformed it into a kingdom. And in the heart of the city's most feared man, she had found not a captor, but a partner, proving that even in the darkest of worlds, the brightest light can come from the most unexpected act of courage. A single act of courage, a teacher's instinct to protect an old woman in a park. That one choice set in motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted, proving that destiny often hinges on the smallest of moments. Vivien Petrova was thrown into a world of immense danger and unimaginable power, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. She faced down assassins, stood up to the city's most feared man, and in doing so found not only safety for her family, but a love more powerful than any criminal empire. Her story reminds us that true strength isn't about wielding power, but about having the courage to act, to love, and to see the humanity hidden within the monster. She didn't just save the mob boss's mother. she saved the man himself. If you were captivated by Vivien and Dante's journey from a violent park to the heart of a hidden kingdom, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a tale of courage and unexpected romance. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store. Comment below what your favorite part of Vivien and Dante's story was. Thank you for listening.